My first murder case, a man had been dismembered and found in a bath, and his daughter had pretty much turned up when the killer was dismembering him.
Name?
Simon Harding. I finished as a detective chief inspector, a senior investigating officer. So I did 30 years in the police. You know, I'm 6'4" and not many people bullied me, but I hated watching people bully other people who were smaller. You know, I couldn't stand it. I think I rang my mum and said, "Mum, I might try and join the police." And she just had this sort of, in fact, she didn't say anything apart from, you know, silence speaks volumes. I had curtains. I had told to cut them down in the first day. In fact, I got there. They were too long. The first murder case, when I had a responsibility to solve it, was as a detective sergeant back in sort of the mid-2000s. And I always remember it because I started on the Monday and the job came in on the Tuesday, and it was straight away the top boss just pointed at me saying, "Right, it's yours." And it was, yeah, daunting is the first thing, because when you go in there is a higher level of, and there certainly should be a higher level of detective ability in those specialisms. You know, you should be batting at the top of your game. So of course that pressure thinks, well, I hope they think I'm going to do a good job, you know. And I remember sitting around a table and there's 30 odd detectives sitting around watching, you know, this team that they've just got this new sergeant's come in and they're looking at you and thinking, right, I wonder what he's going to be like, you know. And there's some big old sort of monsters on that team who've been there for many years, very seasoned detectives. They're looking at you and you think, right, that's a pressure enough. And then there's the pressure of, I've got to solve this for the family. The scene was actually outside. It was somebody who had been beaten to death in a road in North London. Was all part of it. It was all part of a drugs thing, and it was a punishment beating that had resulted in his death. And so, yeah, it was. All the roads were shut. Everyone's watching. People are looking. There's cameras, you know, and you're walking through thinking, "Wow, this is a different level of pressure that I haven't ever felt before." But you switch on, and if you feel you're ready, I felt I was ready to be in that kind of world. So it was something where I just got on with my job, did what I thought, you know, what I thought was right. Get a lot of support when you start in these sort of places as well. I always remember my first murder case as a detective chief inspector and SIO in charge of a murder team, my own team. You are in charge of that investigation. And the first one there was quite a gruesome job, one of the worst I'd probably seen in terms of the crime scene and the nature of the murder itself. And a man had been dismembered and found in a bath, and his daughter had pretty much turned up when the killer was dismembering him, and she had been strangled as well. And they were found after a couple of days. And behind them was a family, a very big family at the time, and kids as well. So it was an awful scene for people to work on, as you can imagine, and very, very difficult for a family to comprehend, firstly, that they have lost somebody, but in that way. You know, that's often what you find in homicide investigations. It's not just about the death, it's in the way in which they died. You know, people will always ask you that same question. Why, you know, did they suffer? Were they in pain? And sometimes, you know, honesty is really important. The way that you have that interaction with the family and be honest and explain things is really important. And I think I've always had that relationship with families in homicide investigations where, yeah, there is a pressure there to help, to solve it on their behalf and to help them. But you have to be honest, because eventually, if you get to a court case, they're going to hear it anyway. I think when you come face to face with someone that's killed somebody else, you know, if you step back before that and you try and picture what a murderer looks like, you can't, because, you know, people who do that sort of thing come in all different shapes and sizes and everything, because there are different types of murders. You know, murders occur in a domestic setting where a wife or a husband has had enough of the other partner and they've just clicked, and you know. And so you're not looking at necessarily what you think is a murderer in front of you. You know, somebody who's had something happen in their life and something has just gone in their head. Then you move on to the other ones where recent cases that I dealt with, there was a boy that murdered 2 women in a park in North London. Did it for money and Satanism and everything else. You know, you look into their eyes and you think, wow, you are proper dangerous. And that's happened a few times in the last few years with me. And I think when you sit opposite them, or you see them at court and how they react and, you know, what they're like, and, you know, there's always that, when you're talking about somebody that has that in them, that's their normal, you know, that normal anger. They are coercive and controlling and arrogant and violent and everything else that comes with it. You can look at those people and think, you know, well, you don't look much, you know. I'm sure families like to square off in a room with most people, but sometimes you look at the odd one or two and you think, wow, I'm so glad that we have managed to get you off the street, because you are the archetypal sort of mad-eyed, dangerous person that has no issues about doing it again. As I've sat in front of people that look like me, look like my mum, look like, you know, they happen to be in that situation, but I have sat opposite people who are seriously dangerous and pose the highest risk and threat to members of the public, and it's an honour and a pleasure to put them away. The funny one really was years ago. I was actually in uniform, funny enough, and one of my colleagues, and I won't mention her name for the sake of embarrassing her, but she, there was an alarm went off at a Blockbusters. Remember Blockbusters stores? An alarm went off, and she's gone there as the first one, and she's screaming over the radio, "They're inside! They're inside!" This is like 2 o'clock in the morning. Anyway, so everyone's running, or sirens, and we blocked off all this huge area. There's loads of people waiting. Somebody starts calling them out in a loud hailer, and somebody sneaks forward and says, "They're by the till, they're by the till, they're by the till." Anyway, so this goes on for ages. They're not moving, they're definitely not moving. And so eventually this old sweat of a cop gets up and he just goes, this isn't quite right, is it? So he goes up and he shines his torch right into the middle of the by the till, and there's a cardboard cutout of Bruce Willis and Whoopi Goldberg standing next to each other. And we were there for about 4 hours, trying to coax out 2 cardboard cutouts out of a Blockbusters video store. So that was probably one of the funniest things I ever saw in my life, actually, to be honest. But then, you know, when you think, what is going on here? It was quite early in my service as well, you know, so I was like, wow, this is a bit Keystone. But, you know, you need those things to break the other things you see, you know, the other, you know, violence and all the other horrible things you see as a cop. You need those kind of funny little stories and anecdotes, you know, to keep you sane, really, because otherwise you can, you know, it can swallow you up.